And then Greg, if you could just go ahead and let folks in as you see that pop up, that would be great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here for our March panel titled Balancing Growth and Sustainability in Idaho. This panel series that we've been doing monthly has been supported through Boise State's Resource Nexus for Sustainability, a grand challenge project, which is really trying to think about how we at the university are thinking about sustainability, but also working with community partners to make sure that we're better understanding what the community needs are and how we can leverage university resources to best meet those needs. And so this panel series has really been a place for us to come together and talk about some of these topics and bring in outside knowledge, whether those community members or other researchers to talk about these different topics related to sustainability. I should also mention, if you haven't been to panels before, my name is Carson McPherson-Krutsky, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Hazard and Climate Resilience Institute and also part of this Grand Challenge team. So the goals of these monthly panels are really to connect across disciplines and sectors, to learn about what some of the ongoing projects and organizations that we have in our community, find out how university researchers and students can better support local efforts and information needs, as I was just speaking about, and then also to consider what are some actions that we can all start taking as we are moving forward under these different topics that we're discussing. I always think it's helpful to start with a few definitions related to these concepts like resilience and sustainability, because they are so multifaceted and have many different types of definitions. So our group really thinks about community resilience as the capacity of a community or a region to adapt to change and thrive despite the chronic stresses like access to resources or climate change and acute shocks such as flooding or wildfire that they may experience. Here, we're thinking about sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And here we have a list of a number of sustainable development goals from the UN. And if you read them, it's really all encompassing. And so I think it will be interesting to hear from the panelists if they have different definitions of sustainability or where they see these different goals fit into the work that they do. So today I'm happy to be joined with my co-facilitator here, Greg Servine. He's a retired wildlife biologist and natural resource manager with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. And he's also an advisory member for the Hazard and Climate Resilience Institute. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Greg, who's going to do the facilitated question piece of the panel, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A from the audience. So if you have questions as we're going, feel free to pop them in the chat. So go ahead, Greg.
Hi, Carson. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. We have a great panel this morning, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves and give you an idea. Perhaps starting with Lee, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lee Belt. I'm the city clerk for the city of Greenleaf. That's a small community of about 1,000 people in southwest Idaho, five miles west of Boise, and 5 miles west of Caldwell, 5 miles east of Wilder. I've been here for about 18 years.
Thank you, Lee. Liisa, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. So my name is Liisa Itkonen. I'm a principal planner. I've been with Compass for 15 years, and I was with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality prior to that for another almost 15 years. And I'm originally from Finland. And what else? I will be retiring in just over 2 weeks.
Oh, well, that's a pretty big milestone. Thank you. Jaap, your introduction, please.
All right, thank you. My name is Jaap Vos. I'm from the Netherlands originally, since Liisa says he was from Finland. I'm a professor of planning and natural resources. I'm also the director of the environmental science program at the University of Idaho and the department head of the Department of Natural Resources and Society. I've been teaching sustainability and sustainable communities, I think, since 1992. So thanks for having me.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Ben, your introduction, please.
Yes. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Ben Newburn. I'm the fire director for the Intermountain region of the U.S. Forest Service. I 25 years of experience managing emergencies, particularly wildfire, mainly in the Western United States, but also globally. I was a incident commander on one of our national incident management teams for a number of years and have worked in a number of different arenas around emergency management.
Thank you very much. So as everyone can see, we have a very well-known, widely diverse panel here this morning. And we think that's going to be real informative to the questions we have set up here, as well as you out in the audience. Remind you, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat. We'll try to get to them at the end. First, we're going to go through a list of questions we've set up with the panel and work through those. And begin with, first question is, how do you define sustainability? So perhaps go in reverse order this time. Ben, how would you define sustainability?
Yeah, so I would start with the slides that Carson shared with us here at the onset, and that is from an emergency management standpoint, I see sustainability as really a way to model resilience in our communities and infrastructure, particularly as it relates to disturbance regimes like wildfire, flooding, and other things. Particularly of concern recently in the last, say, 10 years or so, some of the events that we've seen specifically with wildfire, with catastrophic loss to communities and to our environment. We have reason to be concerned. Entire communities being wiped off maps, a significant loss to infrastructure, loss of life, and definitely something that does not create sustainability, and something that we should think about addressing when we get into the planning of communities of all scales, and certainly specific to Idaho with the growth that we're seeing in the state. Excellent,
thank you. Jaap, how about your definition of sustainability?
Well, it was funny when I saw the question, because it seems it's an innocent question, right? See, it seems so simple, but having done this for a long time, and I think it's also, I have a background as a planner, and I work a lot in small rural communities like Liisa. So I think it's really hard to answer. It's a really complicated question. It really depends on what community you're in, what location you are. When Ben was talking about resilience, that makes sense from an emergency management perspective, but from a planning perspective, it probably makes less sense. So when I think about it, it's easy to simply say that it means that we can sustain our direction into the future, but I don't think that's good enough. To me, it means that we need to create the conditions in which we can all thrive and flourish. It means more than finding some balance between environment, economy, and equity. It's not just about climate change or switching to renewable energy sources or affordable housing or any of that kind of stuff. It means to me that we have the right systems in place to flourish. And I work in a university, and I think we probably need to rethink education. Education today is not the same as it was even 10 years ago. I think about my 12-year-old, she's learning different things, and I'm wondering if she's actually learning the same skills. But I think in general, there are two things that we really need to think about. The first one is we need to think about how we can successfully deal with this increasing rate of change that Ben was also talking about, and how we can have systems that flourish and thrive in that concept. And then I think we always need to realize with sustainability that actions have unintended consequences. When housing prices go up and people cannot live near their work anymore, we get a congestion problem. And now we build more roads, and then we get more suburban development. So I think we really need to have a much more, sustainability to me means a holistic way of thinking about the future.
Thank you very much. Liisa, how would you define sustainability?
Well, to me, sort of really put it simply, it really means living within your means, living within your limits, whether you're an individual or a community. But I would add there that there is an element of sustaining, being able to sustain, and having been involved in long-range transportation planning, being able to maintain what you've built, whether it's your transportation system, roads, housing, your communities. Can you maintain and sustain what you have in the long term, whether it's financial resources or natural resources or your community resources?
Thank you very much. And Lee, how about you? How would you define sustainability?
I think I'd put it as sustainability is your ability to meet your organizations or your personal obligations into perpetuity. And so a lot of that is your financial solvency and how you're going to be able to handle things into the future. But it also has to do with personnel and personnel skills and materials. And that's all a piece of it. But it really comes down to what are your obligations? How are you going to meet those forever for some of our organizations?
Right. It's a good breadth of thinking there to open things up. And so now to get maybe a little more Idaho specific, next question is what has Idaho's population change meant to you all in your position and area of responsibility? So would anybody like to take that first?
I can start. So
Please.
Compass as a regional planning agency, really, that brings together all the local government entities to think about the region and how we want to be in the future. So we develop a regional long range plan every 4 or 5 years that is focused on transportation, but it's based on the forecasted growth, looking out 20 years into the future. And it is also consistent with the local comprehensive plans at the time. And this type of rapid growth and change that we've seen can be problematic because in some cases it's outpacing the local planning. And that's where we then kind of can get into some issues.
Mm-hmm. So you're feeling that from your context of things, the current rate of growth is outpacing
Yes.
our planning.
Yep.
Thank you. Lee, what about you in terms of Idaho's population change and what's it meant to you in your area of responsibility?
Well, similarly, it means that the city has been looking at facility planning and for land use planning. Cities are typically about provision of utilities to its residents, as well as regulatory things that the cities do, and knowing what the next thing is that we would need, say, for our potable water system or a wastewater system, and scaling that to trigger points with increased population are important for us. And also you have a lot of land use planning, which is primarily the city's comprehensive plan. Mm-hmm. And that's key. That's critical planning for the city, and it sets the direction for the future.
And Ben, what about you in terms of the changes of Idaho's population? What's it meant?
Yeah, it's definitely changing the priorities in which we have where we engage our emergencies. We're always going to put life safety ahead of all other values. And so we're seeing a shift over the last handful of years where firefighting resources, other emergency response gets prioritized to these growing population centers and away from other things where we might be protecting ecosystem values or something of that sort, for obvious reasons and for very valid reasons. And of course, we have a finite number of resources. And so when you get into a big fire situation or a flooding situation or something, there definitely are some tensions that are created there. The other thing that I think about is people don't live in Idaho, or people live in Idaho for specific reasons. They enjoy the outdoors generally. They like their natural spaces and public lands. And so we've seen increased recreational use in public lands that generate their own concerns, specifically around human caused fire and needing to build social license and also social understanding of impacts to our public lands, to natural resources and the like with the growing populations.
Great, thank you. And Jaap, what about you in terms of what Idaho's population changes meant?
Well, for an academic, it doesn't really matter, right? But my research matters. So what I've really been looking at is where Lee and Lisa, and to a certain extent Ben, are talking about the quantity of people that are coming. I'm much more interested in the changes in population. So I really look more at the quality of change and how we can, not only are people moving here, we also have very substantial amount of Idahoans moving out. We also have a lot of people within Idaho itself moving. In Boise, you see people moving that can't afford there anymore, go further west in the Treasure Valley, or they move more to Boise County or wherever they go. And some people move to northern Idaho. So I'm really trying to look at what is the what really happens with these population shifts and what does it look like? And then not only from the perspective of just sheer numbers, but more what does it mean? You know, how are those people different from people that you had before?
Great, thank you. So third question here is how are changes in population or land use, like conversion of farmland and forests or ag for homes, impacting community resilience? And maybe mostly direct this perhaps at Jaap. Some thoughts on that in terms of those changes and what it's mean to community resilience?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting and difficult question, I think, because I think it has much more impact than people think. So I do a presentation often, and I'm going to Sun Valley tomorrow to do the same thing again. I was thinking about, and they're asking me specifically to look at resilience. And what is interesting to me is I'm interested in looking at what are those secondary impacts of Idaho becoming popular. And what happens then is, we see much more external influences. We see national builders, we see national developers, we see national planning firms, we see national law firms. We see an entire different group of people becoming important players in local decision making. We're seeing very rich people buying up large chunks of land. We see investment companies buying up large chunks of land. So I'm really interested in looking at, I think your community becomes less resilient because of that. The more outside influence you have, the less resilient to me you are. And I think about Boise when I came here, which was in 2012, and a guy who was fixing my garage door originally actually worked for Micron, and he couldn't work there for Micron anymore. And then he became a painter. And then when he couldn't find jobs as a painter, he started doing garage doors. And I think that's the way the community was. To me, it's very resilient, right? I live here, I'm invested in the community, I change if I have to. I think that's not happening anymore. I think, people are no longer invested. They just follow the next job and go somewhere else. So I think the resilience in Idaho in general is, it's not going in the right direction.
Lisa, how about that in terms of changes and what's it mean in terms of community resilience?
From that perspective, really, what we are seeing is the growth and development when it happens sort of outside the already developed areas. So these would be your farmland and other open space or what have you, foothills. It increases the cost for then providing, infrastructure, services, maintenance again, and that is probably not going to be sustainable for some communities moving forward. So they're kind of incurring the cost now that they may or may not be able to pay in the future. So that is definitely, it's going to have a resilience component to it.
So the overall message there is it seems like the state is, with this growth, which many feel is good, one of the secondary things is the feeling that there's loss of resilience in the communities. So maybe some thoughts on for future decision making, and this question maybe towards Ben and Lee. So Lee, what kinds of decisions are you making now that will impact the future?
Well, we're working real hard on getting our comprehensive plan updated. One of the things that my city council did several years ago, back in about 2006, 2007 timeframe, is that the council adjusted our land use ordinance such that we require a planned unit development for developments that are of 5 lots or larger. Some communities most larger communities that have staff that are dedicated to land use. Small communities, I'm the city clerk, I'm also the primary person for land use planning. And we're not able to do the kind of planning for the future that Meridian or Caldwell are capable of doing. And when you look at 2/3 of the cities in Idaho being under population of 1,500, there are a lot of small communities in our position. Some have put together very good zoning code and comp plans that are oriented towards, say, 3 residences per acre housing, and the developer comes in, they meet the requirements, they build the subdivision. Greenleaf has taken a different approach. We're tied very tightly to that planned unit development. On the one hand, it means that the developer gets to come with the proposal for what they believe as the landowner is the best and highest purpose for that property, rather than the city trying to tell them what the best and highest use is. But it also means that it gives the city a little bit more opportunity to work together with the developer to make code changes that might be necessary to support the development. City of Greenleaf is the only city that I'm aware of in the state that has a residential air park as a part of the community within the city limits. And the tool that allowed us to do that was that planned unit development. So sometimes the ways that you structure your comprehensive plan and the way that you structure your zoning code can, on the one hand, it can make things more flexible. On the other hand, it's a much higher bar for a developer to go through the extra hoops for that particular planning tool.
Right. Thank you. Ben, what about you? What kinds of decisions are you making now that will impact the future?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's a shift in values, or at least priority of values, as the population base grows. And so you look at things like the National Wildfire Cohesive Strategy, the Wildfire Crisis Strategy, where we are refocusing a lot of our efforts in mitigating some of these risks that we've talked about to community protection, community defense, and away from other values. So you wind up with this almost win-lose type of situation that's unfortunate. But again, the priorities are probably adjusted in the right way. Some of the things that we're confronted with is, as we work across defense lines, a lot of these emergency situations do not obey land ownership boundaries and such. And so we're finding the need to work across boundaries in an interagency way between local, state, and federal governments to affect outcomes and hopefully affecting them before the event actually occurs, again, in mitigation efforts to stem what can be predicted. And so as we look at reducing wildfire threat, adjusting to flood prone areas, things like that, some of the things that we run into as examples like we brought up with Greenleaf, when you have these smaller communities, underfunded counties that don't have the ability to help with analytics, data sets, coming from like the assessor's office or something of that sort, it becomes a struggle because so much of the stuff we do nowadays is based on analytics and some analysis that determines threat. And if we don't have good data sets, we're not going to have good outputs to generate where we do our work and how we show up.
Hey, so the message I'm getting here is that things are unsustainable and it's not looking too good. So perhaps maybe more specific and to all the panelists is from your context of things and the work you're doing, what is unsustainable right now?
I could start with that. So when I came here, as I said, in 2012, I had been a planning professor in Florida for 15 years. And within 4 months, I realized that everything I learned in planning school did not fit in Idaho. It really, I could forget everything and I needed to do things differently. Because there was really a different culture, a different way of making decisions, a different way of doing that was very Idaho specific. You know, and then I remember in Teton County, they did this fantastic public participation plan, better than I had ever seen, but I did it totally different than what I had ever seen. So I think we did it the Idaho way, and it worked for a long time. I think with all the changes that are going on, the external interest that we have, external money that is coming in, external firms that are coming in, our planning system is just completely outdated. It doesn't work. We're really not professional enough to deal with these deep pocket outside interests that are coming in. I did work in Idaho City in 2015, and they had this bizarre comprehensive plan and a really interesting historic preservation thing, and it was all wrong. And ultimately I told them, please leave it like that. You know, nobody who has deep pockets is going to come in and deal with this kind of stuff. You are great. At this point, my advice to them would be, you better get your act together, because the people that are coming in have large money behind them. They have big lawyers behind them. And we really need to change to that. The other thing that I think, specifically, I'm also a board member of the American Planning Association and the Idaho chapter, is that we have seen, I think, a doubling of the number of planners, but all these planners came just like me from other states. And they bring with them that typical way that also all these outside interests do. So I think we're really not in a good place. Lee can probably deal with these outside people that are coming in, because yeah, they have their own way to do stuff in Greenleaf, right? And you know who you are and what you are. But I think a lot of communities are not, and you know, and there's no state support for planning efforts. So I'm really worried about what will happen. I'm worried that we will very quickly just be overwhelmed with things. And you now see proposals that don't make it at the local level, then go to the legislature, and there's proposals for the things. So I think we're really fairly poorly equipped to deal with these changes, and we really need to start very quickly rethinking our systems and how we deal with this outside change.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, if I can kind of
Yep.
piggyback on that. And I think a big part of what Jaap is talking about also is the pace that we've seen in the last several years. It's just been so fast, and again, kind of outpacing what we've been able to do. Because it was interesting to see when we had the Great Recession in 2006, 7, 8, and all of a sudden developments just dried up completely, and we were not getting anything new. And it was great. From a planner's perspective, it was great, because now you could really take a deep breath and catch up and really start planning on what is it that we want to do moving forward. How do we prepare for this next jump that's coming? We may or may not be all that well prepared when it did come, but in terms of what I think is unsustainable, one, that the current pace is probably not sustainable, which may be a good thing. And we've had quite a bit of discussion amongst our board members who are, you know, local elected officials about water and the availability of it, and kind of the uncertainty of, will there be water, and are all these new developments really going to be able to have the water that they think they will have, and that kind of thing. So there's some very kind of practical things coming up probably.
Ben, go ahead, Lee, sorry.
Well, from a fiscal sustainability approach, right now, political subdivisions in the state of Idaho are having to work under House Bill 389, which was passed by the 2021 legislature. And it's easy to get into the weeds with that, but in essence, it makes it difficult for new development to pay its own way. 90% of new development is captured, and then your political subdivisions, that includes schools and highway districts, not just cities, are limited to an 8% cap on their property tax revenue growth from one year to the next. Now, if you're a larger community or a larger political subdivision that has a large base, then that may not affect you because 8% isn't necessarily going to be affecting you on your scale. But for a small community like the city of Greenleaf, if I have, say, a subdivision of 100 homes that wants to annex in and develop with my property tax, depending upon the size of our tax base, I may be able to take 4 to 8 of those, and then I'm at 8%, and I never capture any of the property tax revenue from any more than those 4 to 8 homes into perpetuity in the future. And so small communities that are cities are fortunate in that they have some direct control over the ability to annex, and they have codes on that. But our local rural fire department doesn't necessarily have that. And it's a concern for sustainability in the future, because we are literally set up for significant growth that will not pay its way through property tax.
Mhm. Yep, great point. Thank you, Lee. Ben, from your perspective, what is unsustainable now?
I think our old systems aren't sustainable. And I think that's what we've heard from the other panel members is, the systems that we've used in the past will not work to be success and will not be successful into the future. I think about emergency management, and we keep talking about wildfire seasons which we've never seen before every year. And every year we reset the bar. And so we need to rethink the way we're doing all of our business, whether it's emergency management or any of the other aspects to sustainable planning, and think about what is it that we want that outcome to be, and what is it going to take to get there. Certainly trying to continue to do the same stuff that we've done in years past will not work into the future, given the trajectory that we seem to be on in many aspects related to the conversations we're having here.
Great point. And maybe for our last question here before we open up to the audience questions, for all of you, what information or data or systems do you think we need to make better to give us more sustainable economic, social, and environmental conditions for the future? Does anybody want to take a shot at that?
I'll jump out and talk about. So I talked earlier about county assessors data and all the things that we build into the analytics that we use to make assessments, and I think we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But something that kind of on the periphery of this question is the relationships, and that is, how do we work collaboratively across the public sector, the private sector, state, local, and federal government agencies, all the players that are involved in the outcomes here, because we all have parts that we can bring to find the whole solution, and no one party is going to be able to solve this by itself. I think about fire management. So the Forest Service is the largest firefighting organization in the world, but we can't do the work by ourselves. We need our partners in order to be successful, not just for our mission, but for the collective fire mission to affect outcomes. And so, when I think into the future, I think to be successful, we're going to need to develop collaborative relationships, forums for conversations like this to take place, and to work together towards whatever that desired future state is.
Thanks, Ben. Some great points.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also then providing the resources and the support for those smaller communities that they can, have that same level, same kind of data that you would have from the bigger cities, and be able to participate that way too, and get that assistance. In really, I think what we're seeing that's missing is kind of better data on the economic and social impact of growth and development, whether it's from a financial point of view or looking at environmental resources or whatever it is. And looking at cumulative impacts, really being able to understand what does it mean when we have, developments coming in. They may be small, but there's many of them. And right now it sort of feels like the death by 1,000 cuts. But what is the true cumulative impact? We're working on it. We're trying to figure out how to accumulate the data that we and kind of analyze the data that we already have and be able to show some of this, but that would be good. Maybe some academics could help with that.
All right, that opens it up for you, Jaap. What do you have to say in terms of some of our needs, and as Liisa has passed the baton?
Well, thanks, Liisa. Well, to me, the most important thing that I'm in my work that I'm finding is that we really don't understand this population change. We really don't understand who is coming, why are they coming, who is leaving, why are they leaving. People are coming, do they have jobs, or do they bring their 401k? If they bring their 401k, how can we make sure that they spend money locally and not at Amazon? Do they bring their kids? Because we need to know, we need to build schools, right? So I really would like to know better who is coming and why they're coming, but also who's leaving. And based on the research that I've done lately, it almost seems that Idaho is what I call gentrifying, right? What we're actually seeing is people, blue collar people, let's call it that, are leaving the state. They can't afford to live here anymore. And we're seeing people with tech jobs or better paying jobs moving in, or people that are retiring. The research that I did in Sun Valley right now, you can clearly see that. That's always been the case, but it's certainly increasing a lot. So I really want to have better data about, so that we can make better decisions about the people that are coming, better understand what they know and do they not know. Do they know about the WUI? Do they know they have some responsibilities? Do they know that when they move into Hawaii County, there's no garbage pickup? Those are the kind of questions that I would really like to have better information on, so like local planners can make better decisions and better be prepared.
Great. Lee, thoughts on data gaps and information needs?
So sometimes you just plain don't know what you don't know, and you don't even know the right answer, the right questions to ask. I think that there's a lot of aspects when you're talking about sustainability and resiliency for a community, and just having the ability or access to folks that can do a good literature review of, within this subset of that, what's the best practice is huge. We've got to adjust to things on the fly.
Mm-hmm. And maybe as a follow-up question here, something that Ben alluded to, and you're all kind of around the data and information. It seems like there's, in these days of technology and ever advancing sophistication of things, there's opportunities to build information systems and decision support systems that could serve the smallest of communities, as well as at the broad landscape level. To what extent is that something that could be approached, or is that being done somewhere? And what are the potential limits in terms of data or collaborative or decision making? Any thoughts on how we try to build systems to help inform decisions?
It's a two-edged sword. Those types of systems can oftentimes become very complex, and they can build dependence. And if some of the assumptions that are made when those systems are designed are inaccurate, then you've got widespread inaccurate decisions being made. So it's a good idea. It's applicable in some areas, but it needs to be approached with caution.
Any other thoughts on that question?
Well, I think the data question and the systems, it's a really good question, right? And it's like, what do you create for people that is actually helpful? And I've just looked at population data, and I look at census data, and people say, oh, look at all these population. We know exactly how many people are coming from Anchorage to Greenleaf. And, it's 5 people. And then I show them the next table, and it says margin of error 50. All right, that means it's absolutely useless. So I think we have to be careful of that because people don't understand often what the limitations of the data are. The census in December came up with the press release that Idaho was the second fastest state that year, or that was this December, which was absolutely not true because their data actually goes from July 1st, 2021 to July 1st, 2022. Actually, it was the year before even. It was before the interest rates went up. And if I look at DMV data, what we're actually seeing right now is, well, there's a tremendous population change, more than there has ever been. We're actually growing very slowly. So I think it's really, yes, we need data, but people also need to realize what the limitations are of that data. Too often people just, you have these moving companies, right, that are telling, oh, all these people are moving to Idaho. Yeah, well, it's the big moving company. Most people don't use that fan, right? It's a very specific group of people that are able to actually move that way. So I think with data, yes, we need better data, but we also need to make sure that people realize how reliable the data is and what they can and cannot do with it.
Great. And perhaps one more question here for you all is, so I've heard a lot in terms of, the people and the social and the economic aspects of things, but I would imagine many are moving to Idaho for the amenities that the state offers, the environment, the water, the wildlife, the open spaces. What about that data and information, and to what aspect could that help, or isn't helping inform these decisions of what needs to be looked at there? Any thoughts on that side of things? In terms of the natural capital that we already have in this state.
So, I think that can be hard to measure because a lot of times that doesn't go through traditional sources to collect metrics on. But at least the Forest Service, and I'm pretty sure the other federal land management agencies, specifically the Bureau of Land Management, has seen a significant uptick in the state of Idaho with recreation use, both managed and unmanaged recreation use on public lands. And whether we have hard data or just ocular observation of a lot of parked vehicles at the trailhead or tents in the campground, we can tell that there's a lot of people out enjoying public lands. The interesting thing I think that we need to think about is the transition of the use of public lands. Most of our federal public lands are managed for multiple uses, and historically in Idaho that was mainly for resources extraction, timber harvest, grazing, things like that, and those are still valid in certain places. But where are we, or how are we accounting for that land base generating revenue and generating economic benefit into the communities through recreational use? How many people are stopping at the store to fill up their ice chest on the way out to the lake? How many people are stopping at the sporting goods store to buy a tent or a sleeping bag on their way to the camping trip? Things like that, and the effects that brings into the communities.
And I think a part of that is also kind of what Jaap was alluding to, that people moving in here are coming, they're not here. They may not know what it is to live in Idaho and what the values are and how we do things and all of that. And I know that there's some communities in the area actually had developed a brochure on how to live next to a farm, to hand out to new residents moving into the new subdivisions that are right next to the farm, and knowing that they're going to be up early because there's going to be somebody on the field and it's going to smell maybe, and all of these kinds of things. So some very sort of practical things would be really good to know also, and share that information with others.
Great. Thank you, Liisa. So we're at 15 more minutes left. I'm going to hand it over to Carson in terms of questions coming from our attendees. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg, for the great facilitation. And it's just been so fun and interesting to hear all of your responses to these great questions. So we have a number of questions that folks submitted before as they registered, and then we have a few that have been coming up in the chat. Something that has been coming up from a couple people in the chat is, you guys have identified there's these problems with sustainability. Maybe we're not living sustainably, not planning sustainably right now. So what do you all see as tangible steps forward? What can individuals or communities or planners be doing to really move us in a positive direction? So I will just open that up.
I can jump on that, Carson. So several years ago, some of the planners at the Idaho chapter of the American Planning Association realized that we never talked about rural issues. So instead, well, we had usually one panel once a year at the conference where we talked about rural issues, and then nothing happened. So we started meeting once a month, every third Wednesday of the, or every third Thursday of the month we meet. And we started realizing that when we started talking, all these planners from all rural places, but from all over Idaho, that we faced a lot of the same problems. And we started seeing patterns. We started realizing, okay, if you protect agriculture, this ag zone that we have in our comprehensive plan really doesn't do any justice to agriculture. It's really not there to protect agriculture. It's basically large lot zoning. It doesn't protect agriculture. It doesn't stimulate agriculture. It doesn't make agriculture any better or any easier to do. And Canyon County, consequently started having a comprehensive plan where they actually started defining different kinds of agriculture and different kind of ag zones. So I think just having these conversations and not having them every now and then, but having them in a repeated time, and sometimes we have 12 people, sometimes we have 50. But it doesn't matter. We keep continuing having these conversations, sharing experiences, realizing we're not alone, and realizing some small things that we can actually practically do. Things like, in our ag zone, where all of a sudden people started writing down, this is to promote agriculture. And then one of the planners said, yeah, but we tell them it's the ag zone, and then we tell them, but if you do a special use permit, you can do this. And they realized we're always showing them the back door. Let's stop doing that. And I know those are really small things, but if you think about it, this is a statewide group of planners that's all of a sudden realized we're not going to show them the back door anymore. Our ag zone is for agriculture. We're not going to tell them that they should ask for a special use permit because it's for ag. I think ultimately that actually makes a really big difference. And I think the things that Canyon County has done, that we'll probably find some follow-up in other places. So I think we're making some progress, but it all starts with a dialogue.
Thank you, Jaap. And Lee, I see you might have something to follow up on there.
Well, I think over the last 5 to 10 years, I'm seeing more collaboration. Like Jaap mentioned, the Planning Association chapter is more active. I've seen some more, the cities have the Association of Idaho Cities, which I think has reached out and has tried to help create some more dialogue with some of these other groups. The Idaho City Clerks, ICCT, treasurers, and financial officers have an association as well that works under AIC. And within our circles, we try to collaborate. And I think we're seeing more of that be effective than it has been in the past. So.
Thanks, Lee. Does anyone else want to add on to that?
Well, Compass, as the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho, it's a member agency, and we have the 2 counties, all cities in the 2 counties, most of the highway districts, as well as then others as members, and their elected officials come together as the Compass board, and they approve the long-range plan, they've approved the vision for the future, the goals, all of that. So and when they come together as the board, they really are looking at things regionally, and that, just within the time that I've been here, it's been getting a lot, even better. Then things may be different once they are, in front of with their councils and with a developer, and they, the focus shifts. but yeah, there are regional discussions happening also.
Thank you, Liisa. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. So this was from a submitted question, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but there's, as we're seeing, more wealth come into the community, we're also seeing the disparities grow, right? And so I guess I would like to pose a question in terms of how do we move forward sustainably in a way where we're considering the people who are most underserved, and how do we make sure they're involved in these planning processes? So I saw Jaap shaking his head. Yes, Jaap, do you want to start?
No, I really don't, but I will. I mean, that's a really difficult question, right? And because they're usually marginalized, it's hard to get people involved. It's hard to, I don't know. I mean, it's a question I always pose my students, and if somebody actually has an answer, I'm like good for you, because I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to get people involved, to make people, Boise is doing whole this densification of zoning, and everybody knows the answer. It's a bad thing. We don't want to be more dense, but the reality is we need to start thinking about these kind of things, and we need to have these conversations, and equity is part of that. And what I think it will happen if we don't do it is, like I think is happening, is we have people moving out of Idaho that can't afford to live here anymore and are marginalized. So I think we need to have the discussion, but how to have it? If you know the answer, you're going to be rich.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would agree. You might be rich, but you're probably not going to be popular. The thing I think about, and I talked earlier about the analytics piece of it, and something that we're running into is there's newfound interest in mitigation efforts from Congress and other places, and streams of money coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the inflation reduction law, and other places. And as we look at moving money into agreements with state and local governments, there just isn't capacity to take that on. And a lot of it has to do with underserved, underrepresented communities that, I think Lee was talking about it earlier. It kind of cuts both ways. I can give you a bunch of money today. You'll hire people to go out and do that work, but then when that money dries up, what do you do with the person you just hired? It puts you in a very difficult position. And then similarly with the analytics, a good case study last year, we had the Moose Fire up in Lemhi County in Salmon, Idaho, and we're trying to do some modeling around where's this fire going over time and strategic planning to get in front of it. And Lemhi County, of course, is a small rural county that doesn't have the staff, specifically in the assessor's office, to give us some good data on where are homes, what homes do we need to protect? And so, some of the things I think are out there, and I saw in the chat, some of the opportunities through Offices of Emergency Management and whatnot. There are a lot of opportunities through grants and funding right now through state and federal sources that can help out, but we need to be cautious about growing out some more organizations to do that work too quickly, and just the sustainability of those over time. So communities like Lee's that he's talked about those issues, we need to think smartly about that. And then where can we leverage state and federal agencies, specifically, I'll speak for the Forest Service, our ability as we reside within the communities to come in and provide that assistance where we can, knowing that the community itself doesn't have the ability to do that, at least not sustainably over the long term.
Thanks, Ben. Those are some great points. Any other thoughts on that one? All right, we'll keep chewing on that, because it feels like an important one to keep front of mind as we're moving forward. One thing that I always like to bring into this conversation is what role universities play in helping to answer some of these questions. And students who are interested in maybe doing some of these more applied projects, I would love to hear maybe first from our practitioners, how you have or would like to engage with the university on some of these issues. And then maybe Jaap, you could speak to any projects that you've been doing that are kind of community integrated. So yeah, maybe, I know Lisa's been doing some interesting work. So Liisa, you want to start?
Sure. And we've had interns from the university working on projects with us, and we've also had some capstone classes or groups of students work on projects that, with us. The latest is on, well, we did a project on housing and collecting some data there, and now most recently sort of designing a main street for a small rural community. And I think there's a lot of really deep, more applied work that I would love to have more students involved in, and maybe help us reach some of those traditionally underserved communities, and do some projects specifically there to get people maybe more involved and more engaged and building those relationships so that then we can continue working on that.
Thank you. Lee, do you want to go next?
Compass has been a great resource, and they have leveraged some of the universities and City of Greenleaf on a recent reiteration of our comprehensive plan. We benefited greatly from Jaap's expertise and one of the classes that he had. And so I think that the universities are a probably an underutilized resource that's available to small communities.
Awesome. Thank you, Lee. Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, I think just like we were talking about earlier about where can some of the larger organizations, mainly state and federal government, come in to help, just like Lee's saying, I think academia can do the same. There's some cross pollination already going on. The Forest Service has an arm in research and development ourselves, and they already have relationships specifically with the University of Idaho. And I think if we leverage some of those existing relationships and then look for some sort of gap analysis to see what pieces are missing and where can we grow those, there's great opportunities for both the academic institutions as well as our communities to come together and find that collaborative approach that we talked about earlier.
Awesome. Thank you. Jaap, do you want to finish that question off?
Well, if you have another hour. Well, I have lots of thoughts about that. First of all, yes, universities are an underutilized resource. I think universities have a tremendous opportunity because they can actually be statewide, right? We can do projects all over the state. I'm not limited to the place where I'm at. There's some challenges with this, right? And I have lots of student groups that have done work, and I do a lot of work in all kinds of communities. But I'm a tenured full professor, and I don't have to publish. Well, I have to publish, but it's not my first priority, right? And most of the work that I do in communities, the work that I do on population, it's not going to get published in a peer-reviewed journal. It's really, they have no interest in that. But for Idaho, it makes a lot of difference. So I think the challenge with universities is, how do I do that really relevant work for communities, which is fascinating research, and it makes you feel really good, right? I can come into a community and I can really make a difference. We went into Idaho City and we told them, we said like, oh, why don't you, there's all these signs here that says no parking, no trespassing. You really feel very negative. And, they started having this project, Eyes Wide Open, once a year. And they went in as tourists and walked through town and they fixed it. And a year later, when I came back, there was no trespassing signs anymore. It was just it said private property. And it didn't say no parking. It actually had signs to where the parking is. And as an academic, that makes me feel really good, right? We actually made a difference and the community took hold of it, but I'm not going to get it published in some peer-reviewed journal. And that's really for me as a university, the challenge. I would never tell any of the assistant tenure track positions that they need to do a lot of work in the community, because it's going to come and haunt them. The other thing that I think a university is really good at is I can stand in Sun Valley. I'm doing a presentation in Sun Valley tomorrow at the library, and I'm going to say stuff that they don't want to hear. Right. And since I'm not an elected official, I can probably get away with that. And there might be one or two angry residents, but I can say that. So I think the university sometimes has an opportunity as an outsider, as long as you have shown that you're really interested and that you're really sincere and you're respected, you can say some of those things that nobody wants to talk about. So I think those are all great opportunities for the university to get involved. But again, it doesn't fit very well with our tenure track positions, right? And the public.
Yeah, those are real issues. And I think those conversations have come up a lot with the Grand Challenge resource for Nexus for Sustainability group, because we're trying to think about how we make this more possible at a university, which actually leads very well into next month's topic, which I'm going to put a link in the chat, is focused on building sustainable connections, developing projects with and for communities. And we're partnering with the Center for Service Learning to bring in some examples of projects that folks at Boise State have been doing with community partners. So feel free to join us for that. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all the panelists here today. I just learned so much from you, and it was great to hear your thoughts on this very complicated and big topic. So thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.